One of the things that's really grating on comic book readers, maybe not collectors, maybe not speculators, but the readership itself, the people that you expect to come into the comic book shop every single Wednesday, is the fact that comics just reboot back to a #1 issue so often without really any rhyme or reason. You will see comics go back to a #1 issue and keep the same writer and artist, which happened in Daredevil with Chip Zdarsky and Marco Checchetto. It happened on Moon Knight, although they did change the name to Vengeance of the Moon Knight, but it's still Jed MacKay and Alessandro Cappuccio. It happened 3 times with Captain Britain and Tini Howard. They just kept changing the name but keeping Tini Howard on it. You're like, why are we going back to a #1 issue? This is clearly a continuation of the exact same story. And recently, Mr. Tom Brevoort himself, the executive editor at Marvel Comics, the new head of X, whatever you want to call him at this moment, talked about one of the mistakes he thinks DC is making with their All-In initiative, and the fact that they're not going back to #1 issues, kind of explaining his rationale on why Marvel Comics are doing this. It's the classic example that you can have something fast, good, or cheap, and you have to pick 2 because you can't have it fast, good, and cheap. And it's clear that Marvel Comics and Tom Brevoort and C.B. Cebulski and everybody in charge there, including your Nick Lowe's and Dan Buckley's and everyone else, have decided that fast and cheap are the way to go. Damn the quality. We don't care if it's good. We'll just continuously reboot things over and over and over again. But people do get immune, specifically readers, to this, and it turns them off. They stop even recognizing that these things are happening, and everything gets a shorter and shorter shelf life where you have to reboot it faster and faster and faster because the law of diminishing returns. Nobody has any faith that a Marvel comic will go past 20 issues. Whereas in the past, if your comic book got canceled in 20 issues, it was an unimaginable failure. That stuff just didn't really happen. Now let's get into Mr. Brevoort and some examples talking about why this is a terrible idea, both with immediate reboots and then some long-term planning that really worked out for the company. In his newsletter, Brevoort answered this question. I have a question about something you wrote regarding the marketing of comics. You wrote, if DC is relaunching titles with new creative teams and new directions, then they're probably leaving money on the table by not starting with the new #1. Why would that be the case? And this is the answer from Mr. Brevoort in the Man with a Hat newsletter. Because new #1s always sell better than issue number 32s or whatever. You may not like that. You may not believe that it's true, but take it from me, it very much is. So if you're making the choice to continue a numbering, you're doing so with the understanding that the launch in question is probably not going to move as many copies and get in front of as many eyeballs as a new #1 would, but that can be a valid strategy for any number of reasons. More often than not, though, everybody in the field likes money and needs it in order to keep the lights on and the office functioning. So more often or not, a new launch is the best way to go in such instances. I appreciate that they're not going back and doing the #1 strategy, that they believe that the creatives they have speak for themselves. It's a continuation of what was already happening. It's just a turning point for the DC Comics universe. It's not a crisis-style reboot. It's not a change in philosophy. It's just a change in direction, and therefore things should just continue on without reverting to a #1. Obviously, if Marvel Comics were in charge, they would have reverted everything to a #1 because that's what Marvel Comics like to do, because they like that short-term bump in sales. And he talks about it right there. It's all about the money, because Marvel Comics can't trade on quality anymore. They can't really trade on brand reputation anymore because they've rebooted so many times that it doesn't matter what comes out of the #1 unless it's Spider-Man. You assume it's never going to make it to 50 issues. And if you look at X-Men, a flagship title, which should be the #2 selling book at Marvel, the last 2 or 3 never even made it to issue 50 either, because they're constantly rebooting the #1. Even when Jerry Duggan took over, and I guess there's a new team on there and stuff, but it's a continuation of Krakoa's story that Jonathan Hickman was telling him. They still rebooted the #1 for no real reason whatsoever. And what a #1 issue does is bring in speculators, it brings in collectors, because you get lots of variant covers. But what it really does is force the reader to make a decision. Was I enjoying this enough to continue on with the new creator, also at a #1, which tells me that's going to go in a new story? Was it worth it already? Do I trust this new creator? Do I think they'll continue on and do a good job? And a lot of times we're seeing that they don't. They're like, you know what? I was enjoying that. I'm taking it personally. Or you know what? I wasn't enjoying that. And I don't think they've got what it takes to tell a good Daredevil story anymore, stuff like that. And they just kind of tune out, and it's the ultimate jumping off point rather than the jumping on point that Tom Brevoort and other people would like to envision or even sell you on. It's a great jumping on point for speculators and collectors who want complete collections and potential investments within comic books. But for readers, it's the ultimate jumping off point. And we've got a couple of examples that came out in the last couple of weeks, a couple of books that ended, and there was never really even a Marvel press release about it, not really even an acknowledgement anywhere other than the final page of the book. You might not have realized this, but they canceled Captain Marvel again. The latest relaunch of the Captain Marvel comic that coincided with the release of the Marvels has been canceled after only 10 issues. It's probably safe to say the series would have been canceled earlier if Marvel Comics didn't promise retailers they would try to keep books around to increase sales. This is what Marvel editor Sarah Brunstad said. "Ah, dear friends, here we part for a short time. Captain Marvel stories will continue in the Gangbusters Avengers series, and elsewhere, check out the new ongoing Avengers Academy Marvel Unlimited subscribers, but her solo series needs a hiatus while we build the next great story." And truth be told, you and I know, and Marvel Comics know, and Sarah Brunstad knows, and Will Moss, the new group editor of Avengers, knows that the next great Captain Marvel story will be the first great Captain Marvel story with Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel. And they put Alyssa Wong on the book, and she wonged it. Shockingly, when your book can only make it to 10 issues time and time again, you wonged your release. And Marvel and DC continue to hire Alyssa Wong despite no track record of sales whatsoever other than, I guess, Dr. Aphra, which she did wong because sales did tank early, but they didn't cancel it for spite. Kind of like when they kept Captain Marvel going under Kelly Thompson just because they didn't want to have to reboot it for the 14th time in 10 years, so they let it go on 2 years longer than it should have. But this time, they couldn't even validate doing that. They just had to cancel it because it was another dead series that nobody was reading with a character, like the ultimate character, that you cannot invest in. Nobody in their right mind that ever wanted to be a Carol Danvers fan can trust that Marvel Comics will keep this series going for any amount of time, including rebooting it with the same creators and all that kind of stuff. They've done it multiple times with that character. And nobody has faith that Captain Marvel is going to last longer than 20 issues, and it almost never does. It did one time, like I said, out of spite. But other than that, there's no impact to this because no one ever expected the book to last in the beginning because it was Captain Marvel and it was Alyssa Wong. It had a double whammy on top of it, and nobody cares. Nobody's like, oh, wait, I was really invested in that Yuna Yang Captain Marvel series because it really is a Yuna Yang series. Captain Marvel, for reasons, is in the background, even though she was starring in her own movie, but Alyssa Wong had to throw a self-insert character in there. Nobody cared from the very moment this comic book came out, but it certainly sold more on the #1 issue than it did on the #10 issue because there were extra covers and they paid a little extra scratch for Peach Momoko and fucking Art Germ to come in and do something that made you feel a way about the comic book that was never going to happen on the inside because it was going to suck. Nobody cared. Nobody invested in Captain Marvel. But we kind of knew that. There was another character that got canceled this past month that people do care about, that should be not an A-lister, but he's certainly a B-list solo character, got canceled once again. Marvel fans have reached the end of Doctor Strange's solo title. The recent Marvel summer blockbuster event Blood Hunt has come and went and had some major ramifications for the larger Marvel universe. And with that, Marvel's Doctor Strange series has reached its finale. Marvel makes no mention of when another Doctor Strange title will launch or who the creative team will be. We could even be looking at a potential title featuring Doctor Doom. So if you invested in Blood Hunt, which should have been a Doctor Strange Avengers crossover and not a line-wide event, but let's say you invested in it and you wanted to see the fallout and you got to the final issue of Blood Hunt, boom, Sorcerer Supreme Doctor Doom steals the title from Doctor Strange. Big time events. Where is the title that you would expect to see all this stuff fall out from? I would expect to see it in Doctor fucking Strange. Why did you do the event if this wasn't going to play out in Doctor Strange for the next year as he's plotting and failing to try and take the Sorcerer Supreme mantle back from Doctor Doom and going toe-to-toe with him and going behind his back and sneaking in whatever things that he can put together to try and thwart Doctor Doom in the end? Where is this stuff going to play out? You know what I mean? Like, this is the ultimate place where any of this stuff should happen. And if you invested in Blood Hunt and you got to the end of Doctor Strange 18, also by Jed MacKay, the guy behind Blood Hunt, you should have been like, what the fuck? What did anybody say about that? Oh, well, the comic book's canceled again. Nobody even had an emotional reaction, despite this potentially being the second or third most important book of 2025 as we get to like One World Under Doom, you know, which obviously is going to be a major part in the Avengers, but I assume it would be a major part in Doctor Strange. Maybe we'll get a Doctor Doom Sorcerer Supreme book or something like that. But that could have been its own other book that was a big time seller and had people interested. And you could have got another high selling book out of it. And they just like canceled it literally for no reason because Jed MacKay was tired. I'm not really sure. I'm certain that somebody out there had the chops, the ability to take what Jed MacKay did to Doctor Strange at the end of Blood Hunt, literally the only cool thing that even happened during the event. Everything else is null and void and stupid. Vampires can now walk the earth when the sun is out, basically meaning vampires are out there eating people 24/7 across the world. Just a stupid change. Miles Morales is still a vampire, but he can walk out during the day. Who cares about that? Doctor Strange, Doctor Doom. That was the only good thing that came out of this. That should be the coup de grace, and you just give up. One issue later. I don't get it. But you can't invest in Marvel Comics, and nobody does. There's no outcry about this. No one even cares. It didn't make a blip, despite, in theory, being one of the most important titles of all 2025. And I imagine it will be rebooted at some point. But they should have kept this going on. There could have been some life to Doctor Strange, even if the sales were lagging. And I don't even know that that was the case. I think they just decided to cancel it to fucking cancel it. And that's why nobody invest in Marvel Comics. And that's when you hear a story like this, also in that newsletter from Tom Brevoort, that makes you roll your eyes and being like, why can you not see the forest through the fucking trees, my dude? He stated Spider-Girl was seriously the book that would not die, and that was entirely due to a remarkably adept group of fans and supporters who were able to keep the series going by hook or crook for well over 100 issues. And the thing that they did that no other fan group has been able to duplicate since was to get the sales on the title to pop up every time the threat of cancellation loomed before them. So you had a character, Mayday Parker, in the Spider-Girl series in the late 90s into the early 2000s. 100 issues. Right now, Spider-Man normally doesn't make it to 100 issues. And the reason that they couldn't cancel it and it was always saved is because they had fan buy-in. The readers themselves refused to let them do it because they would always come back and support it. There are no readers like that because everyone knows it doesn't matter what you do. You could get the orders up and they will still cancel the damn book because it's Marvel Comics and they want to go back to the number one and get the spec value sales and the collector sales until that dries up. And they literally driven off anybody that has a willingness to go to the comic book shop every Wednesday and invest some money. There's no fan buy-in to any characters, and they used to have it on characters like Spider-Girl. And I'm not saying anything about, Mayday Parker and Spider-Girl. Tom DeFalco started that damn thing. They were putting some real power behind that series. They don't ever put anybody with any type of merit or quality on a book like Spider-Girl anymore, and people just don't care. And this is the environment that Tom Brevoort and C.B. Cebulski and Axel Alonso and everybody else have really cultivated over the years with the constant cycle of reboots to where you have the law of diminishing returns. People invest less and less and less. They stop following their favorite characters like I do. I follow my favorite creators. If Jeremy Adams wants to do 5 issues on Martian Manhunter, I'll go read it. And then when he goes and does 25 issues on Flash, I'll go there too. And then if he wants to only do 5 issues on Legion of Superheroes or something like that, I'll go read that. And I'll be perfectly fine because I'm not invested in DC Comics anymore. I'm not invested in Marvel Comics anymore. I'm not invested in Spider-Man. I'm not invested in Nightwing. I'm invested in Jeremy Adams because I know he's reliable. That every time that he puts a book out, I know what I'm going to get, and it's called quality. That's why I'm invested in Daniel Warren Johnson. That's why I'm invested in Jeff Johns. That's why I'm invested in people like Mark Miller, because you know what's coming when you pay for it. You'll never get anything close to what happened with Spider-Girl ever again because Tom Brevoort and Marvel Comics are all about the easy money. Just reboot it over and over and over again. Reboot it to death, and we'll get those spec value. We'll get those variant cover fans and all that kind of stuff. But we will run off all the readers and the people that made these series last 100 issues minimum to begin with. And that is really the folly of a lot of the leadership at Marvel especially, but DC is also following along. But I will give them kudos, a tip of the cap. I expected them to reboot everything back to a number one, and they didn't. Not everything needs to go back to a number one all the time. And I do appreciate Tom Brevoort speaking out and adding some clarity on this one. I just happen to 100% disagree on everything he said about it. And I think it does far more harm than any good to the bottom line, because nothing has any longevity, because there is no buy-in. There's no reason to do that. If you like what I'm doing here, providing a perspective on comic books that you don't often see, especially in the mainstream comic book media, I do appreciate that. And you can support me in this mission by going over to Think Critical Patreon. There's a link in the video description. And we have awesome podcasts featuring Aaron Sparrow, Doc, Jim, and more of me than you can possibly handle. I hope to see you there very soon.